The circle of fifths is a diagram which helps us see the way that the notes of the chromatic scale relate to one another. It shows us the key signatures that correspond to each note, be they major or minor. It helps us understand the relationship between diatonic scales. If you read clockwise, starting from the C, you'll see that each successive note is a fifth interval apart, and it winds its way around until it comes full circle back to the C at the very top. First of all, notice how the relative minor key is shown for each corresponding major key. And as we progress in a clockwise motion, we get progressively more and more sharps in the key signature until we reach the 6 o'clock position, at which point F sharp becomes the enharmonic equivalent of G flat. From this point, we talk about key signatures in terms of how many flats they have. And as the circle winds its way back to C, we get less and less flat notes. The opposite of what was happening when we came down clockwise on the right side. I think it's essential for musicians to memorize this pitch sequence, since it comes into play when building chord progressions, which we'll be discussing more about in the next video. But for now, just note that consecutive keys on the circle of fifths contain most of the same notes. In fact, they only differ by one pitch. Their similarities account for why they work so well together in a chord progression. They're closely related tonalities. After a while, you won't need to refer to this diagram to remember your intervals, key signatures, or the relationships between relative majors and minors. It should quickly ingrain itself into your memory. It's also important to memorize the pitch sequence going counterclockwise. This gives us the circle of fourths. You can see that each successive degree, when moving counterclockwise, is an interval of a fourth. Again, another important sequence to know about when building chord progressions. Jazz musicians tend to place more importance on knowing the circle of fourths, since the movement of a fourth is so essential to jazz harmony. Classical musicians generally pay more attention to the circle of fifths. Join me in the next video now as we examine chord progressions and find out how they're constructed. The circle of fifths helps us to see how the notes of the chromatic scale relate to one another. The circle of fifths also shows us key signatures and helps us to learn the relationships between diatonic scales. Reading clockwise from the note C, each successive note is a fifth interval apart. Reading counterclockwise gives us the circle of fourths.